Yeah, I mean the question I had is probably a little bit ahead in the chronology, but the is to discuss the one of the biggest grifts maybe in the history of campaign or political fundraising, which is that there are a bunch of us, including Jenna, working on the election contest challenges. The Republican National Committee and some others, but particularly the Republic, raised millions and millions of dollars to help fund those election contests. And as those of us who are neck deep in the election contest know, the much of that money never saw any actual election contest. Can you explain? I mean, what was your experience in that environment? I mean, I know you've raised it directly with the and publicly with the Republican National Committee chairwoman, but it was an extraordinary grift. I mean, ultimately certain election contests didn't get filed in certain states. There weren't, there weren't as many lawyers available because of this. There weren't as many. There were investigators that needed financial support that didn't get it. And every day I was getting the same emails and text messages, send money in to help the president's election contest, and almost none of it went to that.
Right, right. And you're absolutely right in everything that you said. And for those who didn't see, back in about April of 2021, I very publicly left the Republican Party over Ronna McDaniel's lies and also the chief counsel. And this grift started well before November of 2020. Everyone who was at the RNC was telling President Trump, we have this handled, we're going to be fighting. Ronna told me personally, we have this this voting apparatus of how we're doing all of these different contests, because in the context of COVID, and it's very obvious that the left and the Democrats manipulated COVID as a pretext in order to usher in a lot of executive orders and bypass state legislatures under their emergency acts and manipulate the process of voting, all of the mail-in ballots, the administration of the election. This was death by 1,000 cuts. It wasn't as simple as one silver bullet that was so obvious, and it wasn't as simple, as complex as it seemed in the year 2000 in Florida with the contest of Bush v. Gore, and we all remember the hanging chads. Those were a couple of counties with one state and basically one issue. We now had multiple states, even before 2020, mainly Democrat states, and all of the swing states that were challenging the way that the elections were administered in that state by using COVID as a pretext and saying, we are now going to allow for a different kind of administration of our election and not abide by the state legislative rules. And this is problematic constitutionally because under Article 2, Section 1.2, the Constitution requires that the state legislatures select the manner in which the electors to the electoral college are chosen. And prior to 1824, this wasn't even done by the popular vote. The state legislatures actually chose the electors to the electoral college. And then a majority of states decided to delegate that authority and to the executive branch and through the popular vote. And that is a way that the state legislatures can function in terms of their electoral system. But it is a principle of the Constitution that it has to be according to the manner in which the state legislature sets. So there was a huge problem even before 2020. I don't believe that any significant amount of resources, or not nearly significant enough, from the RNC and from the campaign was actually put into this. And Brad Parscale, who you all knew was previously Trump's campaign manager, and then ultimately was changed out for Bill Stepien in mid 2020, in the whole midst of the Oklahoma Tulsa rally. That was kind of the pretext to remove him. He actually has said publicly, and he's told me I can say this publicly, he had a plan that was going to actually put lawyers in key states and make sure to litigate this up front. That never got done because Bill Stepien refused to follow through on that plan. So that was all prior to November 3rd. And that's why everyone on the Trump legal team was very focused on some of the administration of elections and very concerned even going into election night. Then when we saw all of the ways that the executive branch just completely ignored how to administer their own elections according to state law, that was when we had this, what I like to call a multiple pileup of a car accident. This isn't just one state having one crash, a single car crash. This is like multiple states. You have to figure out what happened and build a case on a very, very, very short time frame. So once we started doing the post-election stuff, and I said this very publicly on my good friend Andrew Klavan's show on Daily Wire, when he said, okay, well, what's the likelihood of success here? I said, honestly, very minimal, because it's easier to prevent a crash or prevent something than to try to reconstruct it and to build it later. And this type of complex litigation often takes years, if not decades. We were working on a time frame of less than 3 months. But to get to your question, Robert, as well, very specifically, the RNC also did not do enough after the fact. They were fundraising, which may have actually been potentially fraudulent fundraising, because when they were saying this is all going to go to the legal team, which I was a key member of, we never saw any of those resources. You had the RNC's chief counsel, Justin Reamer, who's sending emails to Liz Harrington, who's now the Trump's spokesperson, who then worked for the RNC, saying that what we're doing is a joke. He was telling people at the RNC, based on sources that I have, that the RNC fundraises more when a Democrat is in office. So we just need to let this go. Then Ronna McDaniel, in April of 2021, went on Newsmax and said that all of that was a lie. She saw the screenshots. And that moment was when I said, I can't support this party anymore until they get better leadership, because she is out and out lying, saying that she didn't know any of that, or that she promised Trump she would fire Justin Reamer. So she's a liar. The RNC is completely obsessed with their own fundraising, and they were not willing to spend the resources that they needed to protect your and my vote.
I feel like I just stepped into like a dispute that I had no knowledge of beforehand. I know Robert mentioned it, and someone says, Viva, can you sum up everything she just said, please? The bottom line of this, from what I can surmise and what I understand, is the RNC was leveraging the constitutional or the election challenges for fundraising under the pretext that the money that they fundraised would go towards financing these legal battles. And bottom line, Jenna, from what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, little to any of those. How many millions of dollars got raised?
It was about 365 million, and I would love to know where all that money went.
Exactly. I mean, in Georgia, as an example, also Justin and other people a part of that team were deliberately misrepresenting things about the legal challenges to the president. Early on, they lied about Georgia. They did a basic misreading of Georgia law that had to have been deliberate. Claimed that he couldn't ask for a recount until there'd been certification. It was patently false. I ended up in the middle of that. I didn't know I was in the middle of it until I was in the middle of it. But and they were constantly undermining any of the legal efforts to independently challenge it. A lot of them were compromised because they had hired law firms that worked for some of these election officials who had done the problem. Like, it was particularly problematic in Georgia. You had the president's legal team in Georgia was that these guys at the RNC had retained were also the legal team for Ratburger. So it was like, how are we going to expose the secret deals he did and come after him when you're also his counsel? And they were misrepresenting basic facts, trying to divert legal resources, trying to discourage lawyers actually from bringing certain challenges. They were obsessed with not allowing a signature match to occur. And we never got one from any place. I mean, I think Just the News, Mr. Solomon did a recent report detailing that an actual signature match check would have shown more votes in doubt than votes. And this is going to Jenna's point about misadministration. Aside from all the rule changes in the sense of allowing this flood of mail-in ballots and sending out mail-in ballots and completely gutting the chain of custody in terms of how those mail-in ballots were submitted, how the voter got them, how the voter returned them. That's the Dropbox issue that Dinesh D'Souza is doing a documentary on. But all the ways, the one way to always catch it was signature matches, because if the signatures don't match, then that would be your way to know that vote is not a credible vote. It doesn't cure a whole bunch of other problems, but at least it addresses that problem, and none of them would do it. And a key was the RNC running interference throughout the process, misrepresenting people throughout the process. But what was most egregious was raising all this money, because my whole team and everybody down there never got paid. And I didn't care, but there were a bunch of other lawyers whose assistance we could utilize that just couldn't continue to work for free for months on end. That just wasn't practical. Investigators that, I mean, we were getting great info out of Georgia, and, you know, we couldn't ask these people to work for free for forever. And then there's just real cost of all kinds of things that you just have to, put out cash for, just administrative costs, things of that nature. And no money was ever forthcoming. And, I mean, she had promised that certain Georgia lawyers would be hired. It never happened. And it was they had got accustomed to misleading the president. To what degree do you think Trump understands that this is what happened? I mean, I get, today he withdrew his support from Mo Brooks because Mo had sort of walked back certain things on these issues. But how much does he understand that some of the people, including Ronna McDaniel, particularly Romney McDaniel, reminder, that these people let him down?